This is lecture number 26 of Introduction to Ethics, RPH 205. And today we're going to talk about the Olympics. So the whole main theme of this class is what is health? And the first section of the class is about all the ways that greed and buying out the political class has led to bad health in Americans. We're at war with our bodies. We're at war with our psyches. We have terrible mental health, physical health problems. So that was, that's where we're at. We started out with Aristotle's view of flourishing, and health means physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, intellectual. It's all aspects of your life and your psyche are in balance and flourishing, active, activities of soul in accordance with virtue in a complete life. That's health. So the purpose of this lecture is to show that the Olympics was a part of Greek culture, and it very much had Aristotle's idea of flourishing underneath the setting up of the Olympics, the way they're organized, all the different rituals, all the different statues, the way the gods were worshipped. So in the last class, when I talked about Delphi, I talked about the goddess and god of justice, Zeus. And so just to give you a heads up, you will see at the site of Olympia and at the rituals, the way the whole games are conducted, you will find Zeus and you will find Hera, the goddess of honor, because staying physically fit is not something that you mandate with the law. You can't force people. You'd have to control their diets and control, so much of their lives. But you honor physical fitness, and that's Hera. And you find Apollo, especially Apollo and Zeus, they play a big role. And then there's some other gods and goddesses, Artemis, Demeter. So my point is that each site takes from those 12 deities. And in Delphi, it had 10 of them, but it did not have Aphrodite or Ares. Those are the ones that undermine civilization the most because they're closest to the brainstem. They're the ones that we can revert to. Those are the ones that drive us when the veneer of civilization cracks open and we do brutal things or we do sexually damaging things. We damage families and all the civilization that's founded on sexual fidelity and family. You can break that wide open. So Aphrodite and Ares are not present at Olympia, okay, because that's not civilization, but many of the other deities are, and I will explain to you my idea of why they're there and what we have to learn from the Olympic Games, from the history of the Olympic Games. So let me give you, okay, let me see if I can show yeah, okay. So here is ancient Olympia, and that is the field where the athletes ran. So a little bit of background. Just like in Delphi, originally this was a site for women, and there were women's foot races. And there were races between young women, middle-aged women, older women. And then it got taken over by patriarchy, just like Delphi did. And the overall philosophy is that every city-state had to have strong young men to protect it in case of war. For the sake of security, they had to keep the young men trained physically. In war, they had to wear this really heavy armor. I mean, they just had to be physically fit. All right, so there were two ways to do that. You could have a military school where you send your sons off to military school and you teach them to dedicate themselves entirely to victory in war. Teach them how to be a tough soldier. This is what the Spartans did. They honored victory in war more than anything else. And if you were good, if you faced danger in war, you were promoted to general. And then if you were good, you were promoted to the political leader. And then in Sparta, there were an 80-year-old council of elders who basically ran the city-state. Okay, well, the Spartans participated in the Olympics also, but the spirit of Greece was much more egalitarian. So the Olympics were set up to prevent war, to try and get the city-states to come together for an athletic competition. So you have to keep your young people physically fit, but you can do it in a way that actually promotes peace and prevents war. And you do it by having this international athletic games, having people from all the city-states come. And well, during the games, there's a man with a torch, you probably know that in the Olympic Games, comes running through the city-states. And the torch, if you remember, represents the light of the mind. And so he's coming, and when the torch is coming through, there's no war, okay? So the message is the purpose, a main purpose of the games is peace to prevent war. All right, so then they get there, and then they have to stay, right? They have the tents, they put their tents up. And so the people who are the athletes get to know the other athletes. And of course, they have a lot in common. They're sort of soulmates. They're competitive, right? And then the trainers get together, the coaches get together. I mean, everybody's got a lot to talk about, and it's much less likely that they will go to war with each other when they know each other. Another really important thing is that they had the training fields off a few miles from here, and the villagers in the town of Olympia were responsible for taking care of all the logistics related to training. I mean, which city-states, wrestlers, or, let's see, charioteers get to train at which hour and which training fields and all that stuff. So it was egalitarian, it was more democratic. You give people authority, responsibility to the level that they're capable of. So everybody's engaged in the process. It's a polis. So even before Athens had created their political community, really, the Olympics were a kind of polis, political community. People come together and they learn to think like citizens. So they come together and they're all recognizing each other's humanity. That's why I call this a humanistic. They're affirming our humanity. It's a spiritual humanity because it's living for the sake of something greater than yourself. But, physical fitness is important. But what's really important about the games is that it activates the God of justice. You have to create this institution. It has to be really well designed to get people to think like citizens. Another really important thing is that the rules apply to everyone equally, right? Nobody gets to be favored. And so anyone who's a judge, if they cheat, right? If they bribe someone or if they call a race, they say that their guy won and really they didn't. Any sort of abuse of the position of judge, because that's applying the laws, is seriously punished because this is sacred. If you abuse that sacred capacity we have to think like a citizen, to think in universal, objective, detached observer ways, you're violating the gods, right? It's sacrilegious. And there's one story I read where a judge actually got killed for doing that. So here come all the athletes and you name it. And right at the opening gate of the Olympics is a temple, no, not a temple, the hearth of Hestia. Now, if you remember, Hestia and Hermes were the god and goddess of reflection, the mind. Hestia is the one who sits back from the throne and tends to the hearth, and the other deities come and engage in dialogue before they come to a decision. And then Hermes lights his torch, and then he brings the message down to people. Okay, in this one, and you all know in the modern day Olympics, they have the torch bearer and then they have the Olympic torch. Probably don't know what it symbolizes. It symbolizes the light of the mind. So the light of the mind should be prevailing over all the whole Olympic Games because it's the light of reason, it's the light of justice, it's the light of human excellence. All right, so that's kind of the backdrop. I think of the people who were aware of patterns and pattern recognition. They were the ones that structured it, right? They had this vision in mind. And of course, some of them earlier on it might have been more vague, and then it got more specific, and they started adding things. And so, like anything else, it's constantly being tweaked and improved, but they're creating a community for the purpose of achieving excellence. All right. So this is where Hestia's flame is, right at the opening gate, reminding you this is a sacred space. The light of the mind shines here. This is a temple to Cybele, the mother of the gods. So again, like in Delphi, this is aggression, but it's not at the expense of the goddess, right? So it's balancing female and male forces. Like in Delphi, Apollo protects the gods. And so the Olympics are definitely a way of keeping people physically fit that's not farming, in the cyclical agricultural societies, you didn't really need to have an Olympics because it was hard enough work just to get food. And so, but once you had civilization, you had Apollo running things, you can get sedentary, right? And you need to stay physically fit. So you have to actually institutionalize it and reward it, but not at the expense of Mother Nature. Okay, this is a temple to Hera. So this is where people knew that there originally, back in the past, this was a female centered. It was part of the goddess centered culture. Um, but okay, and then also there was a statue of Hermes, right? The torchbearer. And that's really important part of the Olympic story. And there's a very famous statue, very beautiful statue that was unearthed in this location. But it's not surprising that it would be Hermes since he runs through the city-states. It's the first thing, things first start get going, and it's to make peace. There's the altar to Zeus next to Hera's temple. So Zeus and Hera honors physical fitness. Zeus structures the institutions um, and ensures that people rule for the benefit of the ruled. There's the temple to Zeus. It's the most important temple. It's located in the center of the site. There's a whole lot of practice fields at this site. It's a big site. So even though there's the practice fields miles away, that's kind of preparing. What they do is they'll pit athletes. So they have kind of, I guess at the Olympics, they have, uh, what is it? They have races before where they eliminate a number of people. And so by the time you get to the center field, maybe you have 16 left. But it was like that. So the best wrestler from one city state wrestled the best wrestler from another, but they tried to watch this go on so that they never ended up uh, assigning a match where they were so mismatched that the worst one could get killed because it just wasn't nearly as good. So they did kind of the siphoning off of the ones that weren't going to make it. And then they bring in the finalists, basically. But even there, once you get there, there's still practice fields because the athletes have to sort of stay in shape before their race or before their event. This is the council chamber where the athletes swore an oath before the altar of Zeus to tell them, this is serious stuff. This is about justice. This isn't just about winning a race. Okay, these are statues dedicated to athletes who were fined for cheating. So if you cheat, then you go down in history, right? You leave behind a story of having been a bad actor. Whereas if you win, you go back home to your city state and you have a statue dedicated to you. So the stakes are high, right? Um, but that's very good motivation not to cheat because you will be remembered forever. And if you remember when I talked about Hades, Hades reminds you of what story you want to leave behind. How do you want to be remembered? There's an altar to Artemis, okay? So if you remember, Apollo and Artemis were twins, and Apollo, the god of reason, is the one that constructs cities, constructs institutions like the Olympics, constructs the laws, constructs Apollo's powers are the ones that judges use when they're deciding who wins. All those kinds of decisions, those are institutions. That's the city. But then Artemis is out in the wilderness and she couldn't care less about the city or her brother's stuff. So the idea is we have that very natural aggression, competition, It's like animals, we run, we fight, but it gets civilized. It gets translated into institutions and part of civic life and part of human excellence. Okay, this is another workshop of Phidias. These are some of the most famous sculptors, and a statue of Zeus was created there. Then there's the priest's residence. So the judges are priests. And again, reminding you, this is sacred. You have to take it seriously. And there's the gymnasium training, where the athletes are training. There's a training for the wrestling, boxing. It must have been quite an amazing place. It's too bad there was an earthquake, right? Oh my, it must have been. You could just imagine if you're an athlete from some rural area, you get to go to the Olympics, but wow, the layout, it's just, oh my gosh, it's so amazing. It'd be such a privilege. And there's the crypt. There's, you run through here to go over to the arena. And there's the place where they run the races. The altar to Demeter is over there on the left. People sit up on the hillside watching. Okay, so there was a hippodrome next to the stadium. So that was where activities, went on. I would imagine maybe, well, all sorts of cultural activities. So it's a community. You're building a community. You're having community events. You're getting people to mingle. You're creating friendship bonds. And you're weaving this society together so that it will be resilient in the face of threats, so that you're less likely to go to war with people. The treasuries, this is where city-states would donate money, or private sector people, and they were kept there, to support, to donate the Olympics. We have that now, plenty of national government donors and then private sector donors. There's the Grove of Pelops, which is the original story of how it got founded. And here's the guest house. So there's the dignitaries, right? If the kings or the aristocrats from some city-state came, they would have the fancy place to stay. There's the baths, of course. That fits. You have to take a bath before, after your event. And then the stoa is a place, it's a covered, and it's straight. It's usually square, but that's where all the food was sold, stuff that you have to have when you have a whole bunch of people around. All the little kiosks. And also people, stoa, the word stoic, it comes from people walking and talking and reflecting about everything that's going on, because reflective consciousness is what Greek culture tries to activate and educate. Okay, there's another stoa. Oh, here's later on. Herodotus Atticus was a Roman emperor, and he was a great admirer of Greek culture. He built a theater on the side of the Acropolis, and that's the one that people attend events at today. There is the original theater to Dionysus is there, but it's broken down and it's not usable. But Herodotus Atticus, wow, he built it to survive, to last. And it really has lasted. It's very amazing. Okay, so this is interesting because this temple was begun by Philip and finished by Alexander. And so what happened was after the rise and fall of Athenian democracy, Socrates was killed. Plato started the academy. One of his students was Alexander. And then Alexander left the academy and went to Macedonia to teach. Uh, Alexander, Philip's son, and then Alexander created this huge empire. So you all know about that. And so it was within, a generation that Greece went from city-states to the kind of learning. Alexander, once he conquered a place, he wanted to set up a system of Greek education and learning. I personally think you have to take it with a grain of salt because it's liberal learning within the context of empire building, right? Whereas, in the city-states was the organizational principle. Of course, the Athenians corrupted their city-state by trying to make it into an empire. And Plato calls them out on it, but Alexander wanted, an empire. And so after he conquered, I don't know, I guess he got as far as he wanted to get. I mean, India or something. Anyway, there was a speech, and he said, okay, now that I've conquered, let's all just get along. So he wanted a Pax Romana. So he wanted, the rule of law and all this stuff. But, it's not that simple. And people don't like being dominated. And so there's going to be a lot of unrest, which did happen. But Alexander was pretty naive. He just thought, yes, I'll conquer it all, and then we'll have liberal learning, and then we'll all be universal. We'll think like citizens, we'll think globally and act locally and stuff like that. But okay, so that's the Olympics. And so that's sort of the rise and fall of this Greek city-state um, uh, democratic way of governing, where city-states come together and they're equal. Another thing about the Olympics is that anybody could become an Olympic athlete. And so the city-states, really, many of them gave opportunity for people from the lower class, even slaves, to compete because they wanted to win. So they want their very best people. Of course, the young men from the privileged class were more likely to qualify because they had all these trainers and they had spare time. But in theory, anybody could do it. So it was this effort to be equal. And at the time, it was much more inclusive than the monarchies or the aristocracies. And so it did have this ethos of trying to lift people up, some social mobility, which is a big deal in that time because there wasn't much social mobility. Okay, so then the other thing I wanted you to read, so I had you reading a 7-page essay about health, and then I wanted you to start in the philosophy of sports book. So that was the one of the books assigned. And you were supposed to read the first 27 pages. So it was the the introduction, chapter 1, chapter 2. So, so this is my friend Heather. I met her years ago at a conference in Olympia, of course. And she was just telling me about how the Olympics was cultivating this view of reason, objectivity, universality. And then that was very inspiring. And I said, oh, well, I can connect that to all the gods and goddesses. And she liked that actually. So, What is the ancient Hellenic heritage? What is it from that original Olympics that has been passed down today? So she herself, she's in philosophy, but she had been training to be an Olympic athlete, bicycle race. And you have to train all day you just have to train all the time to shave off 100th of a second off your time. And she just got kind of disgusted with it all. It was just too out of balance. Um, so I will say what happened at the Olympics. This is really funny because in Plato's Republic, it says that what happened was it got corrupted, all right, by money and power. So every 4 years, the Olympics was at Olympia, but the other 3 years, it went from there was the Nemean Games, and there were games at Delphi, and then there were games Epidaurus. Okay, so every year there would be some kind of games, worlds like the World Cup versus the Olympics or something. And the idea of the Olympics was holistic health, right? That everybody should be healthy and everybody. The other thing about the Olympics was that it wasn't just athletic contests. There were contests in music and there were contests in reading Homer, which in the US would be equivalent to reading from the Bible, right? Just, you know, speaking well while you're reading a story and expression and all that. So there was a contest for being good at rhetoric, but it was also training you how to live. So the idea of physical fitness was that isn't the goal of life, right? You train the physical fitness is to get that aggressive side of you, right? That brainstem aggression to sort of channel it. And then the music is to get that pleasure side of you and channel that. So it's not just about sex, it's the pleasures of beautiful music, the pleasures of beauty. And then you learn the lessons of Homer. Here's how to live. And so it was really holistic in a lot of ways. Now, Heather's book talks about what is the legacy, what was the original idea, and what was it compared to what the original, right? How is it today and how does that compare to what it was? So her book is about that. Her book is also about the reason I think it's appropriate is she talks about the influence of Descartes on sports today, the influence of Kant, the influence of the utilitarians, the influence of John Locke, the influence of capitalists, and the influence of Karl Marx. So we have she's a student of history, the intellectual history. So she can explain how all these major thinkers in the West, way after the Olympics, have influenced the Olympics today. But she starts out with what is the original message and the heritage. So in the Iliad, there were some funeral games dedicated to Patroclus. Um, and what does it tell you about the place of athletics in sports, about how that played a role in their culture? So she said it was a relatively open process for redistributing honor according to merit. That means social mobility. You would honor somebody who's excellent at sports, even though they're a lower class, right? They earned it. A relatively open call for voluntary participation. You know, everybody can sign up. They can try. It's not, nobody's told that they can't even try out. a common understanding of the rules. So it's this Apollonian understanding, universal truth, a uniform starting line. So, nobody gets to start ahead. Responsible referees. So that was a sacred duty that the judges um, judged fairly. The resolution of disputes about fairness. People don't think it's fair. They can have a dialogue, right? It's not might makes right. It's a conversation. Nobody gets to decide, you know, who wins. If it's contested, you have to support your conclusion. It's not just because you have this position, whatever you say goes. The selection of victors, the awarding of prizes, and it's a kind of excellence, right? Um, through action, you have to prove yourself, right? As opposed to who your daddy is, right? What your family you belong to. What is the philosophy? It was religious. It brought together, this is just a repeat of what I've said, but I do want you to, understand, I think I can say it twice, that it is really amazing if you think about what they must have been thinking about to create this institution. You bring together diverse tribes for a common cause. There's a truce, protecting athletes and spectators traveling to the games, which, the Greek city-states had a lot of wars, so this was a standout. It's not always normal. There's an effort put into it. The pacifying and unifying effects of bringing diverse people together to engage in fair and transparent decision-making process, right? It tends to unify people. They tend not to be afraid of each other, to get paranoid, and to want to declare war on each other. Careful policing of the integrity of athletes and officials. Cheating is really sacrilegious, and we will have, we will keep an eye on you. Violations are an affront to the gods. It's a breakdown of social hierarchy. People know the difference between winning due to effort and winning due to wealth, right? Breaks down this sort of unearned privilege of the privileged class. Everyone's equal under the law, and everyone has equal access or opportunity to participate in public debates. As a free citizen, this is also associated with sports. So they have that equal opportunity to participate in public debates. They have that at home back in their city state, but now you bring that habit, that nature of that friendship bond relationship, you bring it into discussions about sport. Excellence is associated with citizenship through effort, like sports, not inherited. So citizenship is a kind of exercise of excellence. It's not just you were born in a certain family, so you are a citizen, or you have, additional access to control in your city state because of the family you grew up in, right? This is all about effort. And the education of the soul or the psyche. So their word for soul is psyche, and it's much more connected. It's natural, okay? Okay, Socrates and Plato's gymnasium, the academy. So, in Plato's dialogues, Plato's showing the corruption of Athens and how they lost their democracy. And one of the major ways was that the teachers, the sophists, were teaching the best and the brightest. They were charging a lot of money, so only the wealthy. Before that, everybody went to the agora, the marketplace, and talked about the jury trials, what the assembly was voting on, And people could learn how to think about public affairs just by talking to each other. But now the sophists come in from other city-states. They make a lot of money, and they don't care if Athens functions well or not. They just say, well, these kids' parents paid me to do it, so they must know what they're doing. But what the parents really wanted was for their children to learn how to speak persuasively. So that was the skill. And so that when they stood in front of the assembly when the voters were deciding whether to go to war or on some sort of policy, the privileged class wanted their children to be able to speak persuasively and get whatever they wanted, get the assembly to vote. Same with a jury trial. So that's how it got corrupted. Intellectual competition. It became like a boxing match. You fight, you take somebody down, you try to get someone to contradict themselves, and you can play little intellectual games. And I don't know if you've ever played intellectual games with people, but they're an abuse of your natural talents. I think it's pretty abusive. But that went on quite a bit in Plato's Athens. Socrates exposed the sophists for corrupting the city by teaching the youth how to win arguments without any concern for their goals in life. And their goals were power and money. They didn't care about preserving their society. So the enlightened athletes, right? There's some athletes I just want to win at any cost. I don't care. But there's other ones that really want to compete with people who are as good or better so that they can get better. You're ultimately competing with yourself, or you're just seeking excellence. So in Plato's gymnasium, the ideal is that you would be both beautiful and good. So, if you are physically fit, you have a beautiful body, but what really matters is to have a beautiful soul and have a beautiful life. And so a beautiful life is one where you take pleasure in achieving excellence. You can, check it off the check sheet that I did my exercise today, but you don't like it, it doesn't. But if it's beautiful, if you like it and it makes you happy, and you just go through life appreciating the level of excellence in yourself and other people, and everybody's aspiring to that. That's beautiful. Plato didn't eliminate the military or physical exercises, but Plato wanted just to direct it toward a different goal: wisdom, virtue, and international cooperation. And so in Plato's school, he also had physical fitness, but the priority was clearly to love wisdom, virtue. And Plato's Republic points out that it got too specialized, so that the city-states, instead of overall wellness and spending time and money providing for opportunities for the citizens to stay well, they saved their money and poured it into when the Olympics were there. And then they had this big party, and most of the people came just to drink and carouse around, and they were couch potatoes. And then the athletes became way over specialized. So they had a trainer and a coach. And in the Olympics in Greece, it's dusty, it's dry, and they trained with olive oil on their skin because it was so dry. But then the sand, the dust would rise up, so it made kind of a mud pie. So each of the athletes had this person with this sickle who would like wipe that off their body. So each athlete has this whole entourage of specialists taking care of them. And it got to the point where they weren't even that overall healthy because their regimen was so strict that every time they got off of it, their health sort of fell apart. It wasn't overall wellness. So the athletes were overtrained and everybody else was just not even fit. So Plato points that out, right? That physical fitness is for the sake of the soul, it's not for its own sake. But the virtues of an athlete can be part of the overall virtue, right? Courage, endurance, and indifference to wealth and fame. And yeah, and you have to have courage and endurance many times in many um, dimensions of life. Sometimes it's just facing danger, but a lot of times you have to have the courage, moral courage to speak up if you think something's wrong. You have to have physical courage sometimes if you're confronted with just physical obstacles. Overall endurance is really important. And in the symposium, Alcibiades recognizes that Socrates has a beautiful soul, even if he has an ugly body. So the Olympics tended to get harnessed to you want to be physically fit so you can be sexually attractive, right? It got reduced to sexual attraction and sexual relationships. There was a lot of infidelity and sexual relationships between people that weren't married. Um, but Socrates had a beautiful soul, even though he had an ugly body. Now, we also have the Aristotle's virtues. So we have been looking at those. And all right, so how would they apply to the Olympics? Well, don't overtrain or undertrain. Um, self-control, right? Eating, drinking. Courage, a healthy competition, channeling aggression in a healthy way. Rational ambition is recognizing and cultivating your talent for the sake of excellence, not money, fame, or power. Rational honor is you honor physical fitness, even though you can't force it legally. Friendships, you meet people, that's really important. You have a whole new network of friendships. Less likely to go to war. You know yourself. You recognize your strengths and weaknesses, and you resist the desire to cheat in a critical moment. You learn how to restrain yourself. Political virtues, right? Really important. Uh, international peace, international cooperation, equality of city-states in relation to each other. Some of them might be wealthier, but at the Olympics, everybody's the same. Apply the law is the same, agree on punishments. Um, you monitor the honesty collectively, distribution of social goods. So social hierarchies are based on talent. The intellectual virtues, you use reasoning to create the institutions, create the whole program. You manage the people when they arrive. You calculate the best ways to make the event run well. You you are using wisdom every particular decision, and you're giving arguments for your decisions. So when the Olympics occurs, there's always various controversies, right? In the middle of it, right? And people will say, oh, why didn't they plan ahead for that? Or, geez, they forgot to prepare for that. Or um, they shouldn't have organized it that way. Or something, or some athlete, does some crazy thing. Could they have accounted for that? Did they punish correctly? Oh my gosh, there's always debates. But my point is that there's types of debates. They're related back to the human condition. We always debate these things. There will always be these types of things that will come up. And then you don't just say, oh, it's always a problem. You just go, okay, each decision you could do better and worse, and you can leave behind a story of How did I deal with that decision? And you can learn from your successes and you can learn from your mistakes. That's the deliberation process. That's the education of the mind. All right. So chapter 2, the modern Olympic revival. So now we have the whole background. Now, in 1896, it was revived to promote the Western tradition. Now, it shouldn't have been, it didn't have to be, but okay, the Enlightenment, the British were running the world, colonialism. So it was revived as a way for British and the colonial powers of Europe to proclaim their superiority. And, it was a little sketchy, but I don't know, the Greeks were pretty, they believed in this moral superiority, cultural superiority. They had their own superiority complex. Uh, Sometimes I think it was justified, but not when it gets corrupted. So that's what I don't think Plato disagrees with the tradition. He disagrees with the way it got corrupted. He is very upset about that. So, okay. So the primary tenet of Olympism, right? And that's just Olympism is that you believe in all the principles, right? Um, is a philosophy of life, exacting and combining in a balanced whole the qualities of body, will, and mind, blending sport with culture and education. Olympism seeks to create a way of life based on the joy of effort, the educational values of good example, and the respect for universal fundamental ethical principles. So I think we've covered that. Um, that's a carryover from the original Olympics. If we define philosophy according to its ancient Greek meaning as the love of wisdom, or characterize it as a disposition for learning and contemplation following Pythagoras, which Pythagoras view, it's also compatible with Chinese Taoism. Um, you can have a flexible interpretation of Olympism, and I think so. I think it's an international standard. The International Olympic Committee asks the national committees to resist political pressure. Political demonstrations are banned. The IOC opposes any commercial abuse of sports and athletes and places sport at the service of humanity with the goal of promoting peace. The association with peace was probably not begun with rules, but as a result of the unifying and pacifying effects of multicultural competition, specifically the ability to set aside differences, treat others as equals, and tolerate differences. Okay, so I've said that before. You bring people together, you create friendship bonds. You don't have to have so many rules, or the rules will just sort of emerge from that. They aren't top down all the time. Participants had to tolerate each other when they're living and dining together. They must have shared stories and had meaningful dialogues. The games relies on the need for cooperative decision making in the absence of a single authority, right? There's no king up there saying might makes right. They're deciding among themselves. It's a dialogue. Recently, the committee committed itself to the principle of global environmental sustainability. So, and that's a part of the peace promoting philosophy. Now, yeah, sustainability is going to be a big issue in your generation. And we haven't paid nearly enough attention to it at this point in time. But by the time you take over power, which will be in about 20 years, I think there will be radical changes. The weather will be very different, and people will start acting on that. And entrepreneurs in the US will start making money on going green, and we will have different habits and different we will use products, we will have new products. So I'm not sure how an event like the Olympics or the World Cup, I mean, the whole thing isn't necessary. You could have statewide competitions or whatever. Um, I don't know how that will play out, how much the carbon footprint will matter. I don't know if we'll have enough carbon free. You can do it with neutral carbon neutrality, but we'll see. Anyway, it definitely should be connected to peacemaking. We'll need more and more of that as time goes on. So that that is today's lecture, and it kind of hopefully brings together what I said way at the beginning, Aristotle's view of flourishing, and we still have the Olympics. It was part of Greek culture, it makes sense. And you need to pass on that legacy in your own way. But I think you should think about that. Do you want to pass on in some way this particular view of human excellence?